We're still waiting to find out whether Novak Djokovic will be deported or allowed to stay and play in the Australian Open. Let's bring in our political panel now. Dr Sherry Sufi from the Institute of Public Affairs joins me from Perth, and Ebony Bennett from the Australian Institute from Canberra. It's good to see you both. Thanks so much for joining me once again. Let's start with Novak Djokovic. So the poll in the Sunday Age that was out today found 71% of Aussies want Novak Djokovic deported. His lawyer says the debacle will cause global reputational damage to Australia overseas. Ebony, first to you, has the government got this one right?
Well, it's been interesting to see who can get access to justice here. It's very rare indeed, I think, to see the full bench of the federal court convene on a Sunday to hear matters like this. But I think really no one comes out of this covered in glory. I think primarily the responsibility lies with Novak Djokovic, who should just have got vaccinated like most of his colleagues have. And I think who should have been quite aware that Australia had a condition of entry that people should be vaccinated. But certainly it looks like Tennis Australia and the government have not responded very well either, certainly in the domestic context of the fact that tens of thousands of Australians were trapped overseas for 2 years, many of them vaccinated themselves, unable to return home during the pandemic due to border control. So I think that's certainly the context that the government is operating within, but it will be highly embarrassing for the government if this gets turned over on a technicality. I believe the court has adjourned and we won't find out until tomorrow. The immigration minister has almost unprecedented powers to cancel visas and do what he likes with borders. So if this is overturned on a technicality, it will be hugely embarrassing for the government. If not, and Novak Djokovic's visa cancellation is upheld, he'll be out of the country, and it will be a bit embarrassing for the government, but I'm sure tennis and Australia will survive.
Sherry, in the first hearing we heard Judge Kelly believed that Novak Djokovic thought he was good to go when he came out to Australia and did all the documentation right and everything like that. But at the same time, he could have avoided all this by just following the rules and getting vaccinated. Do you think the government is using this as a bit of a distraction from the other things that are going on?
Look, I think the government is making the decision that it genuinely believes is in the best interests of Australia and its citizens, as it should be. The first thing to bear in mind is that this is a constantly evolving news story, and each of us that are trying to understand it, get our heads around it and comment on it and formulate a position can only do so based on the best information that is available to us at any given moment in time. Now, as we've seen since the last time we had a conversation about this topic, there has been more revelations. There's been new information unearthed. There's now a statement put out in which Djokovic has confirmed that there was an error in disclosing that he was in Spain when he filled out that form upon entry to Australia. And there's also been a revelation that despite the fact that the basis behind his exemption was that he had tested positive to COVID, that he was out attending ceremonies, and he was trying to downplay that in his statement as well. So, these bits of information weren't available the last time we had this conversation. So as new information becomes available, each of our position on the matter is also going to evolve with it. So since this has turned more fragile than many of us would have probably been able to foresee, and there is an active legal proceeding going on over it, the best thing all of us can do is to suspend judgment and let that procedure continue, let that procedure do its thing, and each of us can hope that the decision that is made in the end works in the best interests of Australia and its citizens. That should be our top priority.
Ebony, Anthony Albanese, the opposition leader, he's been making comments on this almost daily, saying that the Djokovic saga has caused a great embarrassment for Australia. Is his messaging cutting through, do you think?
Look, I think it is, but I don't think that message from Anthony Albanese and Labor would be cutting through unless there was fertile ground here within the community. So many people have really struggled to get back into Australia because of harsh border restrictions enacted by the federal government, in part to protect health, but very draconian, as we've seen over the past 2 years, certainly with threats to imprison Australians returning from India, for example. Many people have been vaccinated and still unable to return to the country for months on end when they had loved ones and relatives dying. So there's a lot of people in the community who feel like this is a double standard if Djokovic is allowed in and they weren't. So I can see why there would be strong public support for the government to cancel his visa. But it has been an absolute shambles from the get-go, really. It feels like much more should have been put in place by the federal government and as well as Tennis Australia to avoid this all from happening. But I just want to agree with Sherry's comments there about Novak Djokovic's behaviour in it on of itself. He's been incredibly irresponsible, and I think that's also contributing to the reasons why Labor's messaging is cutting through here, that they can see that things are a shambles, whether we look at the supermarket shelves or whether we're looking at how the government is handling visa cancellations for the Australian Open. I think that's all feeding into the public sentiment against Novak Djokovic here.
Well, we await a decision from the federal court. Sherry, New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet, he's marking his 100 days in office. Of course, he's pushed to get life back to normal, whatever that means. How do you judge his first 100 days?
Look, I think that he's been a breath of fresh air, and I've, on the record, have said this previously. I stand by that comment in leading the charge on the transition from from our COVID mindset, as you will, to the post-COVID mindset. One thing that I think is important for us to highlight here is that we're sort of still approaching the everyday decisions as if we're in 2020. And as we move forwards into 2022, we really need to understand that we have, 90% herd immunity now, something we didn't have. We didn't even have vaccines in 2020, let alone herd immunity. All states, including Western Australia, need to be focused on leading the transition out of COVID into a post-COVID world. And we can't have a public that panics every time there is a new outbreak. And we also can't have authorities that concurrently panic every time there is an outbreak as well. We need to start to learn to find ways to live with COVID. And that should be our attitude heading into 2022.
Ebony, Dominic Perrottet, he's been known by some people as the let-it-rip Premier. But we have seen that with the New South Wales government modelling that hospitalisation rates are tracking below the best-case scenario at the moment. Is that let-it-rip kind of phrase earned or deserved? And how do you judge his first 100 days?
Well, I think so far in New South Wales, living with COVID has proven to be an absolute disaster for most people. The Premier kind of led people to believe that opening up the economy would, be good for the whole community, but instead we've got empty supermarket shelves, the testing, tracing, quarantine system completely overwhelmed, people unable to vaccinate their children on time, unable to access rapid antigen tests needed to keep the workforce going, huge numbers of staff members who are out sick with COVID or quarantining or isolating as close contacts still. So living with COVID has proven to be basically an absolute disaster, not only for public health, but for the New South Wales economy, which has plummeted to lower levels seen than at any other time during the pandemic. So what the Premier promised the community and what he's delivered are two completely different things. And I think there's a huge gap here between the confidence that the Premier displays at press conferences about how the state is dealing with COVID and this wave. There's nothing post-COVID about it. We're in the middle of a massive, wave of Omicron that is overwhelming the hospital system, even if fewer people are being hospitalised. The numbers are so huge that it's still overwhelming the public health system, whether that be hospitals or GPs or elective surgeries, people being pulled into other situations. So I think this is one to watch. I don't think the public in New South Wales think that Dominic Perrottet has been doing a particularly good job, and we'll wait to see how it shakes out. But at the moment, things are pretty dire for a lot of people, and I think they'd be very disappointed in how this has been planned and how it's turned out.
Ebony Bennett from the Australia Institute, Dr Sherry Sufi from the Institute of Public Affairs. It's a pleasure as always. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.